Good morning, New York City. This is the amazing Rob Layson. Today we have Walter Wojo, uh, attorney, also stand-up comedian, joining our podcast today with Draft Ice podcast. Can you tell us about your podcast?
Yeah, I talk mostly football. I'm on a lot of football shows now. Draft Lice is just my moniker for talking football, but on Fridays I'm on Let's Talk Sports. Every Friday I'm on the 5 o'clock football Friday football show. A lot of football. Not a lot of football now. You got the Super Bowl last weekend, so that kind of cuts down on the football talk. Although there's still a lot of off-season activities, which is sometimes the most fun for people who are fans of the football season because it's the off season, it's the season of hope. So yeah, I talk a lot about a football, the building to the draft, players, trades, players, cap, salary cap, the difference between salary cap and cash spending, things like that. Kind of a lot more of the business and sports side of it. What teams could do to get better in certain circumstances. I'm totally unqualified, by the way. You shouldn't be, not for nothing. Like it is what it is. Everybody can have a podcast. So I was totally unqualified for a football podcast. I've never been in a team setting before. But nonetheless, still talk about it because otherwise I would still be talking about it. So I was like, figure we'll just go ahead and record it one day, and that's what Draft Vice was. And then people liked it enough where two other people who heard of my show asked me to come on theirs, and then they asked me to stick around. So Thursday nights I'm on Face Off with Facemeyer with Brenda Facemeyer. That deals with a lot of Commanders fans, a lot of Washington D.C. area sports fans. And then Fridays, Let's Talk Sports, big network, big in the amount of people that are involved, not big in any kind of monetary fashion, but it's run by Dan David Harris. Dude has a few medical issues. I think cystic fibrosis. He's dealing with cancer right now, lymphoma. So he's kind of dealing with a lot of things, but in his process of being bedridden, not being able to go out, COVID, he came up with this idea for this network, started reaching out to people, came on Face Off of Facemeyer, then roped me into being on the Friday shows for the last 2 years. And yes, that's most of I talk football a lot, even though I'm totally unqualified to talk about football. But so is everybody who talks about football. Like, let's be real. That's sports in general. That's why we have sports. We could all be unqualified idiots watching the football, being like, I know better than that guy who spent his whole life doing this. That's what I enjoy is playing armchair quarterback. But yeah, and I got to do that for other things as well. I talk a little bit about the law, less so on my channel than I did a couple of times last year during the pandemic, all that stuff. But again, football, law, and then stand-up comedy, all big things in my heart. Today, after I do this, I'll be going to shoot a Harry Potter college Hogwarts kind of American sketch with a few friends of mine on Grizzly Guys Comedy. So we're going to be doing that today as well. So it's a busy day, but it's great to be here with you, Rob.
Yes, it's amazing, Wojo. And whoa, Wojo. How'd you get the name Wojo? The people want to know.
Oh, it's a family thing. Believe it or not, my family said, "Oh, we're gonna name you Walter," but then they're like, "We don't want to actually call you Walter. That'd be too easy." What happens if this guy actually went through life with one name? So, yeah, my mother agreed to name me Walter because it's a family name. And then she's like, you know what? Like, I personally am not a huge fan of Walter. Sounds like an old man. You're a baby. And in fact, I had an ex-girlfriend who's like, what convinced your mom to name you some old ass grandpa name like Walter? And I'm like, well, it's a family name, but she calls me Wojo. And then she goes, well, that sounds like a serial killer clown. I'm going to stick with Walter. So Wojo's a family name. There's people who are like, I know for my whole life, for the first anybody I met in my first 20 years of life knows me as Wojo. Anybody who knows me since I turned like 21, 22 and went to law school probably knows me as Walter to some degree. Although there are people who kind of like retrofitted it. They went like, wait, you called this? I'm going with Wojo. So the Wojo name still sticks around. It lingers. I have family members who have never called me Walter in my entire life. I think I have family members who don't even know my real name is Walter. Strange thing.
Wow.
It's one of those things that even in school, I think I made it to 7 or 8 years old before I knew my real name was Walter.
Wojo, Wojo, the real deal. So you kind of you got into the whole NFL draft, fantasy. Are you more draft or fantasy when it comes to your NFL?
Both.
Your
Those are my
podcast.
two favorite things. The fantasy, and then the fantasy leads into the draft because like I think I started out more as a fantasy guy, and I kind of was like, like that was what my friends, like how we all connected on it. It's a socialization game. I have friends who've moved away, but it's the one thing that we're connected on every year. So I've joined new leagues. Like this year, I joined a league with a bunch of old dudes who play standard, and now and this year I walked away with all their money, so it was great. So it's a fun game to go ahead and do. I started out with fantasy, and then eventually, a couple years later, I got into the draft because it was like, oh, like that's your edge. Everything in fantasy is about an edge, and how do you get your edge? You look to the future, evaluation. And with the draft, it became very much of watching tape for guys from college, trying to figure out why like guys succeed or fail. So, for like the last 7 years, I've been really into the draft, and the last few years, I've been talking about the draft, and that and I go on people's shows and talk about it, and we go over the different teams certain guys line up on. But like I said, I'm totally unqualified. As like I said before, typically everybody does a commentary on sports. We're all unqualified, but that's all okay. I also have opinions on comic book movies in general, TV shows. Opinions are fun. Everybody has them.
What's your top 5 comic books of all time?
Comic books or comic book movies? Because comic books are weird because like the individual issues are like it's the buildup of the story a lot of times. They're set up. So like for instance, I remember the Blackest Night series where they're going ahead and it's the Green Lantern Corps, and you're seeing all the different the rings from the lanterns. And now you have the Red Lantern Corps, you have the Violet Lantern Corps, the Indigo, all that stuff. So that was always fun. I remember the Civil War comic book series came out when I was in high school, which was they kind of retrofitted Civil War for the comic book movies. It's not very similar in a lot of there was a lot more X-Men involvement in the comics because they didn't have the rights in the movies to use the X-Men. But those two series I really enjoyed because they were these big build up, again, like people liked Endgame and how that built up to something with the Avengers movies. But like those were big build up moments, and they used Civil War in the Marvel movie universe. But like those were like, so like a lot of times it's the build up of the story. Like sometimes they have graphic novels, the bigger ones. The bigger storylines, like you have Frank Miller's Darkest Night. Like you have all these kind of really cool directions that they go in. I also just sometimes like reading random ones. I like that I might not even be all that interested in initially. I just started reading Good Boy, which is kind of weird. It's like a neo-noir dog story. Like the dog becomes
Right.
an FBI looking into who killed his master, his owner, his whatever. So it's kind of a it has a very like I really enjoy neo-noir. Like I remember watching a lot of like the Maltese Falcon, all those noir movies from the 50s. And neo-noir got very popular in the early 2000s with movies like Brick, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. You had all these really cool movies that were very neo-noirish, kind of noir essence. The Frank Miller Sin City movies, again, very neo-noir. Those were great because like visually they were very different stylistically, movie-wise, than what you had seen in the past. They like to use a lot of the rotoscoping, kind of using the black and white and very desaturated tones to go along with a very saturated rotoscoped tone. Sometimes it'd be somebody's eye or a red tie, things like that. You saw that with Spirit as well, as they tried to do the same thing. So I those movies I always kind of enjoy. I like the things that are a little bit different, and I think there's just something we all kind of like the mystery in life, and that's what neo noir kind of lingers into. It has some ties to mystery. It has some ties to crime and the mafia movies, and those were very big in the '90s and in the '70s, and the gangster movies. So they all kind of tie in. So I again like my love for all artistry kind of comes from all different directions. Like I was really a huge movie guy about 10 years ago. Like I said, today we're going to shoot a sketch for the Harry Potter USA campus, which will probably be up later on this month. But part of that all comes from like my background wanting to be a filmmaker 10 years ago and learning how to shoot things and learning how to use lighting to make a room totally different, like figuring out ways of doing VFX, doing clean plates, locking down the camera, rotoscoping out some of the images, or using a green screen. So like figuring out those things out, making my own Dragon Ball Z fan shot for a Cramp Relief video where you're trying to win a contest. So all that kind of ties in. It's all film is like the ultimate art form. Like if I could do film, I would absolutely go into film again. But it's such a wide art form. You need to rely on a lot of people to do film. You don't need to rely on many people to do a podcast. You don't need to rely on very many people to do stand up. Well, I love stand up. Stand up's great. It's all storytelling or telling jokes or playing with the crowd. It's human interaction at its finest. You're up there, you're on the stage, or you're in a room in a bar, and sometimes you're crowd working people and you interact with people, and it creates a unique experience that you don't really get with film a lot of the time. Like people have their own unique experiences with film. You might have your unique experience with watching say Kiss Kiss Bang Bang or Titanic, or what's your favorite movie?
My favorite movie of all time would be the Rocky. Yes, with Sylvester Stallone.
See, very good movie, and that has such a great story behind it. Sylvester Stallone writing the screenplay, tying himself to the screenplay, making himself the character of Rocky to the point where it's so iconic now. And he ended up. It's a great movie. It sprung a series of movies. It sprung Sylvester Stallone's identity partially for the next 10, 15, 20 years as this great action movie star with that and Rambo. So the stories with that's the behind the scenes like stuff with it, the effects of that movie. But you yourself probably have your own personal reason why you really like Rocky. It might have been the time that it came out. It might have been like when you were a kid, you wanted to be a boxer. It might have been when you're an adult and you can identify with with kind of taking the hits and trying hard and wanting to win and training and understanding that the training element and keeping up is such a big part of it. It's not necessarily whether you win or lose. It's really about getting to that point. It's about the training. It's about pushing yourself to be the best. It's not necessarily that you will ever actually be the best, but if you keep pushing yourself, you might get there. And that's such a huge thing in Rocky. It's such a big thing in a lot of movies. Movies kind of affect your identity. Like when you go ahead and you watch, like especially, I think it's one of the issues right now with film is that you have very little new movies being made. You have very little things that are coming out that are like 10 years ago, you could get a movie made for 20, 30 million, and it could be like a cheaper rom-com, or like for instance, a movie like Knocked Up or Superbad, movies like that where you go ahead and you watch and you're like, okay, this is like it didn't cost $100 million to make this, but there's something very uniquely funny about it. It might not get its initial burst of popularity right away, but there's something really nice about it. Like back in the 80s and 90s, you had longer runs in theaters. So movies kind of got their time to build up an audience in the theater run. And if they didn't win it in the theater run, they could go ahead and win on VHS and DVD. And now we live in the streaming world. So it's all very, again, I feel like comedy, art, film, it all kind of ties into each other. Even music. I'm not a musical guy. I always wanted to be, but I always have a lot of props to the people who play instruments and who can do musical stuff, because it's a very impressive art form.
I like the musical stuff too. Some of the musicals are better than the regular. What's your favorite musical movie or play of all time?
Oh, that's interesting. Like, because you know what, like with the musical like element of like, so like I always think of it like music has so many ways it plays into something. So like musicals, like you talk about like for instance, my mother's favorite movie is like one of her favorites is probably Mamma Mia, which it's so
Mamma
funny because it's
Mia,
like such a unique
Mamma
thing
Mia.
of like she has that love for Mamma Mia because the music's very good.
Yeah,
It harkens back to the 80s. So there's like a nostalgic feeling for it. Again, ABBA, for for my mother and her side of the family, that like her side of the family really loved the musicals. Like she loves Annie, she loves all that stuff. So for her family, it's a huge thing of getting to watch those things that they, like with Annie, it was my mother and her family's all redheads, so they all really tie into that. With Mamma Mia, I think there's a very big love for Meryl Streep and the ABBA and the music from the 80s, and it's a very enjoyable, soundtrack for them. Music in movies, though, doesn't just have to be necessarily for like musicals. You think about The Departed, right? Such a great movie, 2006, and music plays such a key role in just getting people to go see it. I remember the Rolling Stones music kicking off for the trailers for it and getting people pulled in for it. It they have, Greatest Showman has a couple of good, like the thing with musicals is it's very hard to hit um the musical element along with the storytelling element along with you know with like the actual, like for instance, like I feel like sometimes if you go to see them on Broadway or you go to a play or you go to a musical in person, even if it's like the acting's not great, there's something inspiring. That's why I love stand up. It's an in person element to it. You eventize it. That's the thing with musicals and Broadway and stagecraft is it's eventized. It's that moment. You're getting a unique moment every time you want to go see it. Um, I know Beetlejuice, they made a musical version of Beetlejuice, but again, music plays a very big role in the movie Beetlejuice, where they go ahead and they play the Banana Boat song. So again, it's music in movies again is another thing that all ties together. They're all intertwined. There's not like, especially movies, because movies are such an art form that it's such a it grasps over the span of you have music that goes into it, you have the music that's the background of it, you have comedy, even as a stand-up comedian, if you were to take some of the jokes that you do as a stand-up and apply it to maybe when you're doing writing a movie or a dialogue scene or something, it could probably work. There's some unique mannerisms that come out when you're doing stand-up that don't come out in any other form, because the art form is such a strange art form that it's personal. It's each time you're getting up there, it's independent of itself, but it's also building. Like you're working on a set, you're going somewhere, you're in front of a crowd, or you're in a room, you're in an open mic and you're in a bar and you're talking to 5 people who don't want to listen to you. It's surprise comedy. Some people love that. Some people react to that with knives. It's a very diverse platform as well.
Yeah.
So, but you get stories out of that, and you get some very unique elements to writing and stagecraft and even acting. Like I've gained a new appreciation for acting the last few years, as like as a comedian, because I've learned a lot of the comedian stagecraft is like, hey, can you get yourself to tell something this particular way, and maybe it'll have a different effect. So it's all about it all ties into each other. And again, I'm very much I'm a fan of all of the art at that point, I feel like, because there's always some inspiration you could take from somewhere. Whether you're a fan of like 1800s impressionist painters, or you're a huge fan of Marvel movies or Star Wars, or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or the DC movies, or Zack Snyder, or any of the stuff for the last 20-30 years, there's always something you could take away that maybe again individually plays to you. Like we were saying before, Rocky, there's a story to how it got made. There's a story probably how it interacts with your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So you're starring in Harry Potter, or it's a play? It's a Broadway play?
It's like a, I would say, a comedy skit. It's like SNL, right?
A comedy. Oh, SNL.
Yeah, I think of like an SNL thing. I'm not starring in it anyway. I'm behind the scenes guy at this point. I helped
Oh,
write it
okay.
as well. It's three of us. We
Okay.
have it's called Grizzly Guys Comedy. It stars
Right, right.
three of us involved with it. It's Basim Tanuzi.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
What?
Oh, I just said whoa, whoa, whoa. The Wojo.
Exactly. Yeah, but there's three of us that are involved with it. Basim Tanuzi, Taylor Andrews, who is the musical kind of guy, and then again, I am this, whatever I am at this point. And, I'll go ahead. I could sit there, talk football people, talk sports people, talk movies, TV shows. So, and those are the things that I really enjoy in life, because there's so many different inspirations and different times where those things kind of become a thing you lean on. And then, again, I feel like some movies, it's very unique. Like I was saying before, people, you're sitting there asking me about the musical. What's your favorite musical? And it's a very unique thing, because there's some musicals that I really like as the musical itself, if you go get to see it, like Wicked and Beetlejuice. But when you're going ahead and watching something along the lines of like a movie, like Greatest Showman, Les Mis, Les Mis both as a movie and as an opera, very, very impressive. So again, everything kind of ties into each other. I can always try to appreciate the really good or the really good try in something, even if I don't love the whole thing. Except for that M. Night Shyamalan Avatar Airbender movie. That was dirt. If anybody here is a fan of that.
Yeah, what? Oh, Avatar?
Yeah, the live action one that M. Night Shyamalan did. M. Night Shyamalan.
Do they have it?
Man.
Is it live is the Broadway live in New York, right there? Or
no, the movie, the live action movie from about 10 years ago. M. Night Shyamalan ruined Avatar.
Oh, the one, the one. Is that the second Avatar or the Avatar 2, right?
Oh no, that's the other one. That's the James Cameron Avatar. That's a different thing. I have not seen the second one. I saw the first one though. The first Avatar. I think the Avatar: The Last Airbender, if you tied it into Avatar, the James Cameron movies, would have been way more interesting. Although, as far as live action movies go, if you had the blue people along with people who could firebend, I think that'd be a very unique element. But what's your favorite TV show? Or do you are you big into television or not?
Wow, yeah, I used to watch tons. I mean, I watched all the old school, Rocky, Sylvester Stallone, Van Damme movies. Like back in the day.
Die
yeah,
Hard.
Die Hard, all the old school actors. Like, I mean, the last of the Mohicans. Like you got Sylvester Stallone, you got Mel Gibson. You got Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like, I think they're the last three of the Mohicans from my time that are actors, that I grew up on. So,
yeah, well, Stallone's still doing stuff, strangely enough, or he was doing stuff up till a couple of years ago.
So Stallone, he just actually, I want to talk about Stallone because he played the Rocky movies. But he just did something called Tulsa Kings, and it's a new film. It's filmed in Oklahoma, and it's called Tulsa Kings, right? Mm-hmm. But from what I was told, what I heard from Sylvester was that he originally went and tried to play in The Godfather because he grew up in South Philadelphia. So when he tried to get on The Godfather set, they said that he didn't look Italian enough.
Really?
Yeah, Sylvester Stallone. Yeah. So he didn't get the part in the movie, right? So, this was years ago. So Tulsa Kings is the first movie that Sylvester Stallone gets to play a gangster. So he really wanted to. You gotta watch it, Tulsa Kings. I think it's on like season 10.
Ooh, I'll check it out.
Yeah. Or not season 10, episode 10. Yeah, but season 1, episode 10, Tulsa Kings, Netflix, maybe Hulu. Yeah, and it's really good, actually. I mean, because I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. Tulsa King is about a guy from New York, okay? He did a bid and for the family, okay? When he got out, there was nothing for him in the city, right? Sylvester gets mad. He's like, yo, he said, I just did 20 years. there's nothing for me. You're telling me there's nothing for me. You know, I lost my wife, I lost my kids, I lost all this stuff. And they said, we got one thing for you. And they said, it's Tulsa. And he said, Tulsa? He said, I'm not going to Tulsa. And yeah. So he got a ticket. He didn't have a choice. He got a ticket all the way to Tulsa. And yeah, you got to check it out, man. But it's called Tulsa Kings. So they got Sylvester Stallone living in Tulsa, playing a gangster, which is, you know, he's out there with all the cowboys, you know. So
I'll have to
so
check.
imagine a guy from New York in Tulsa hanging out with some cowboys, you know. So see how that works out.
Yeah, that sounds like a movie they would have made like 10 years ago, years ago, where they're just like, yeah, like this guy's a fish out of water, and this one is a cowboy's trying to get the girl, and it sounds like something like when they would make like the Shanghai Nights movies and things like that, where it's just like, okay, two random characters together, like Lethal Weapon with Mel Gibson, like where they're, hey, you know, he's a tough, you know, loner cop, but here's his partner kind of deal. That was such a big the buddy cop thing was huge throughout like the 90s, late 80s, you know, into even the early 2000s. Huge genre.
Yeah, the movies, they don't make them like they used to. You know, the last good we had was like The Sopranos. You know, The Sopranos, which that was filmed in Jersey.
Yep, right in Newark.
The Sopranos. Yeah, right in Newark. Yeah. So, besides that, you know, I mean, we haven't had any really good, besides Tulsa Kings. Tulsa Kings is the next latest. It's not a movie, but it's all right, man. It's, yeah. Well, how about you? Your favorite gangster movie of all time?
Oh, I think I'm going to go with The Departed on that one. I think, because I mentioned it before, I don't know if it's Scorsese's. So it's weird because, like, I would say that, like, if you're trying to really say gangster movie, Scorsese probably does have a better one from 15 years earlier. But I still think The Departed, and granted, you know, The Departed is kind of a remake too of another movie, so there's things that take down on that. But it's such a, you know, I just like Jack Nicholson in a movie. You know, that's what's such a fun element to it. Having Jack Nicholson playing a villain for anything is so fun. Leonardo DiCaprio and Matt Damon playing opposite of each other, trying to figure out who's the rat, is such a fun dynamic. And like, again, and infiltrating, you know, the Irish mafia up in Boston was just kind of a fun element of it. You know, usually all the you know, like, for instance, Goodfellas, very much a different time frame. Again, both are kind of based on true stories. I know Goodfellas is a little bit more based on the true story, whereas
oh, go ahead.
Goodfellas is based on like a real true story, whereas like The Departed's kind of like vaguely, like, there's some elements that we're basing some of these characters on in Boston, but again, it's also based on a pre-existing story from Japan as well. And they kind of merged, you know, some of the set dressing from the Boston Mafia and Whitey Bulger, and combined it with this film from Japan. So, but Goodfellas, again, another really good, I feel like, more about the mafia, getting up the ranks in the mafia. Very good gangster movie as well.
Yeah, I gotta see the Departed again. Yeah. That sounds.
It's so long. That's the problem. It's like 2.5 hours. I'm like, that's the only problem I have with it. Scorsese got to a certain age and he's like, I'm just going to take everybody's time. 2.5 hour movies from now on. Wolf on Wall Street, The Departed. Everything is 2.5 hours if it's a Scorsese movie. Which, like, listen, I love Scorsese, but like, there's a point where it's like, I think he had one that came out, The Irishman. That was one I did not want to wait. I did not want to spend 3 hours on. Although, like, again, it was a good movie. It was just, that was the one where I felt like, okay, now you're just spending all your credit.
Right.
Scorsese's a great director, and that was like, he loves that genre, and he always kind of like goes back to that genre a lot. The gangster movie, the mafiosos, you know, everything from back when, you know, even when it has like elements, even in Wolf on Wall Street, even though it's not a mafia movie, it's still a crime movie. It's still a gangster movie. Just the gangsters are on Wall Street, so it very much still fits within that scope of a Scorsese movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's amazing. Whoa, 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 whoa! It's the Wojo.
But yeah,
So,
what would be your favorite gangster movie?
well, it's actually I have a musical. I like the West Side Story.
Ah, nice.
Yeah, what you remember the West Side Story?
Yeah, well, and then they remade it a few years ago, and the remake looks very weird. Like it looks very weirdly shot. The original was way more enjoyable because the original is from its time, right? So you go ahead and you go back, you watch the West Side Story like originals from years ago, and you go, okay, this is very, a lot of movies back in that time frame were shot much wider, so you're kind of used to watching some of these older movies that have that wider shot. It feels like you're watching a musical. West Side Story, when they remade it, looked really weird because I'm not used to watching these musicals that are shot like they're dramas that sometimes like work, but sometimes just kind of feel very weird. I don't know why. I feel like because I'm so used to watching those musicals when they're shot out wide or they're all kind of part of the scene, where it feels more theatrical. But again, West Side Story is a great one though. I agree.
Yeah, that's a classic. They had us watching that in elementary school. No, in junior high.
Yeah, the original one because it harkens back to Romeo and Juliet, and it's a nice, it's a good at that time modern day retelling of it. Nowadays, it's a little bit older, but now you have like when and that's why like I didn't really need to see a remake of it because first off, people put on stage plays of it all the time, and the original very much holds up, and I think it's a very good telling of an old story that it just feels like, and like that's because that's a lot of stories, like everything in narrative format kind of follows certain lines of you know there's like only like a handful of real plot devices to use, and that's one of them that seems to really work. The star-crossed lovers storyline, and it works really well there, and it's a very enjoyable both musical and gangster movie.
Yeah, a little bit of both, man. The musicals. I always like the musicals. A big fan of musicals. So the movie's way better when they do it as a musical. I gotta go. I gotta get out to New York City and go to Broadway. I gotta get out there. When I get out there, I'll come visit you, man. We'll go hit whatever the latest show is out there.
Absolutely, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, New York has some of the best stuff going on. Even when you go to an off-Broadway play or an off-Broadway musical, there's always something really cool going on in New York City with that kind of stuff. I think Beetlejuice is coming off of Broadway now. I think they're going to go on tour. That was one that I wanted to go see. I think I might have missed out my shot to go watch that while it's been on Broadway. It might be touring to some places that I might be able to get to go see it. But that's another one that's a very good. I love how they brought that back. They brought it back in such a unique way. The music to it, I've heard some of the music to it, very enjoyable. And then the original movie has some, like I said before, music does play a little bit of a role in that original Beetlejuice movie. And everybody who's gotten to play Beetlejuice has kind of played it in their own way. Michael Keaton played it his way. The actor on Broadway plays it a different way, but again, very comically. He's a very comical actor in doing it. I think it just works very well. Or it fits very much the Broadway musical, maybe in a way that people didn't expect.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, who did you have picked out for the Super Bowl?
I really thought the Eagles were going to win that. The only thing I had really counting against the Eagles was the experience on the Chiefs side and their ability to make adjustments, and they did it. And that's what I think really swapped that Super Bowl around. I think when you looked at the first half, the Eagles were up by 10 points. You had Mahomes looking a little, little much ailing because he was coming off a high ankle sprain. It looked like he might have re-injured it. So there was a point in that game where I think people went like, oh, this game's already over and it's halftime. And then you get to the second half, and all the adjustments come in. And, after the Super Bowl halftime show, the thing is with the halftime at Super Bowl, it's longer than your typical halftime. So there's a conditioning element to it. I remember Tom Brady and Bill Belichick talked about this a few years ago. There's even a conditioning element for, how you deal with the longer halftime. And I think that might have played a little bit of a role into how the Chiefs handled the second half of the game. They made adjustments. They were able to get guys schemed wide open on the Kadarius Toney and the Sky Moore touchdowns. So I think Andy Reid's the best head coach in the NFL. Pat Mahomes is probably the best quarterback in the NFL. I don't know how many people question. I think there's some arguments for number 2, but I think as of right now, I don't know if you can, maybe in a couple of years, people can make an argument for somebody else. But as of right now, I think if you look at what they did with what the Chiefs did, and there was a lot of things playing against the Chiefs. Pat Mahomes was under pressure, I think 35% of the time, which is a very high pressure percentage for a guy who didn't get sacked, was able to kind of move around, extend plays, get the ball out of his hands really quick. The fact that he was able to do that, I think, was what led to them winning that game. The defensive touchdown, the fumble recovery for a touchdown. Jalen Hurts played immaculately in the first half, played really well throughout most of the game. But that one mess up led to 7 points in the other direction. And I think that really hurt them, and that really played against, the Eagles being able to come back to win that game. Their defense played well. But again, just because your defense has been playing well for portions of the game, they had moments where, hey, the corner holds a guy and they get a defensive call and the game's over. And it felt like the first 3 quarters of that game was very exciting. And then the last quarter went by like that. And I think it's just because you're dealing with all the excitement of it. But it was a great game. I think like the first 3 quarters were super exciting. You had a lot of that go back and forth feel. And again, that defensive hold, I think, sapped some of that from people. I think a lot of people wanted to watch a little bit more of that game to see the comeback effort from the Eagles, maybe take it into overtime. And I think that would have been exciting. But listen, man, James Bradberry can't hold Juju Smith-Schuster. And, the Chiefs win their second Super Bowl. They're at their 3rd Super Bowl in 4 years. So,
Yeah.
Counting against the Chiefs was always a bad mistake on my end. I think I really counted a lot for that Eagles defense to be able to get pressure. I didn't account for, how well the Chiefs were able to handle the pressure and how they were able to scheme around that pressure. And the Eagles defense still played really well for most of the game, although again gave up quite a few points at a certain point. But I also think it's just because you're playing against the best offensive-minded head coach in the game in Andy Reid. You were playing against probably the best quarterback in the NFL at this point in Patrick Mahomes. They built up, they brought in a lot of wide receivers this year to replace a very expensive wide receiver. And it never seemed like any of those guys truly clicked, but they all played roles at different points. Again, I think the Eagles played really well. I think the Chiefs played really well. The Chiefs just ended up winning. And I think counting against the Chiefs is super hard when you're, again, probably one of the best coaches and one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mahomes, absolutely. MVP for the game and for the year. So.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because, again, like, he lost his best receiver and played better this year than he did last year. And I think that's impressive on its own note. And none of those guys stepped up in a way where you're like, oh, that's the new best receiver. He found ways of getting the ball moving. It's not like they never had a problem. They still have Travis Kelce, who's a really good tight end. But they were having issues at tackle like they did a few years ago. It's kind of why I had worries about it, because the Super Bowl that they lost because the other team was able to get pressure on them, was able to beat the tackles, was able to beat the guards. And the thing is that their interior trio is really good, with Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith and the guy who they got from, I'll remember it eventually, the guy who they got from New England who ended up leaving at free agency. They gave him one of the biggest guard contracts. So their interior trio was really good. They traded for Orlando Brown 2 years ago. They franchise tagged him the last year, so he's playing with some extra money. He was not as good at handling edge pressure this year. Their tackles were a little bit hit or miss this year. I'll say that. And that's what I thought it was going to be, a little bit of a struggle. I just didn't account for Patrick Mahomes playing even above the board on that, handling the pressure really well, being able to convert and being able to get the ball moving. And again, they were down 10 points at halftime. He was limping a little bit. There was a little bit going on there where you're like, oh, they might not win this game. But the halftime adjustments were huge. And that comes down to coaching. That comes down to experience. And Andy Reid has all the experience in the NFL. He's been a head coach for 20-something years now. Their defensive coordinator, Spagnuolo, used to be the D coordinator on the Giants and then was interim head coach on the Giants. I think he was also a head coach. I think it was the Rams. He was the head coach up for a little bit. Very experienced defensive coordinator. Very good at getting pressure, re-scheming up guys, and just getting, and not for nothing, I thought Jalen Hurts played really well. There's some throws on that Jalen Hurts film that was amazing. The throw to A.J. Brown for the touchdown, the throw to Devonta Smith to get down to the 1. I think Jalen Hurts played amazingly, except for like 2 or 3 plays, but one of those plays counted for 7 points in the other direction, and that, I think, really hurt them.
Yeah, it was definitely the interception. But they lost by the turnover. That's what.
And they almost had a second one. That's the other thing. They almost had a second fumble. If it wasn't by Jalen Hurts, that would have been by the running back. But they almost had a second fumble when they threw the ball down the line of scrimmage. He had the ball, he turns, and if he gets popped a second later, and that ball goes up in the air, and it looks like he makes a football move, they would have had 2 defensive recoveries for a touchdown. So you would have had 2 fumbles for a touchdown. That would have been insane. I think it worked out pretty well for the Chiefs. I think, again, it could have gone either way, I think, especially if they didn't get that defensive hold. That was such a big deal. Now, again, I'm not complaining about the defensive hold. I'm not one of those people. All right. This isn't Walter. If it wasn't for the refs have been bad all year. That might have been one of the calls they actually got right. I think the problem with refs in the NFL is they just got to be better during the regular season and all the way up to this point, because then you can't, you have to be better. You have to be above board, but it is a hard job. They're not, the NFL can make adjustments to fix that. But at the end of the day, it was a hold. Bradbury held the guy, and the Chiefs won. And the Chiefs won because they made adjustments, and the Eagles could have adjusted better and tried to close out that game, and they didn't.
Yeah, and so hopefully next year they get a rematch.
Oh, for sure. Well, this is the only thing. I look into this offseason, I feel really good about the Chiefs, right? Usually when you were going into a Super Bowl and you win a Super Bowl, you have a lot of guys leaving in free agency. They have maybe one guy who you feel worried about with Orlando Brown leaving. He was the left tackle. So they do need to address that. But they addressed left tackle a few years ago in a very unique way. They traded for a left tackle who's at the end of his deal. They swapped picks. They went from the first round to the second round. They brought in Orlando Brown. They got him for a year or two. Got him for a year, franchise tagged him for the next year. And they were able to figure out a way of not expending too many resources to correct their left tackle problem. And he was certainly better than what they had before. So that's the only real issue I feel with the Chiefs. The Chiefs can only get better, in my opinion, because their receiving core outside of Travis Kelce, unless Travis Kelce retires or gets injured at the beginning of next year, hopefully he doesn't, knock on wood, just for his sake. If he gets injured, but he's the only thing that really, I think, changes that offense if they lose him. Everybody else, him and Mahomes are the only 2 real star players on the offense. Everybody else was kind of like a role player. Marquise Valdes-Scantling, Mecole Hardman, Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney, all really good players. Juju Smith-Schuster all played really good snaps this year, but none of them were star players. They weren't Tyreek Hill a year ago. So I think that that makes me feel more excited for the Chiefs' future, given that you just won a Super Bowl with maybe not even the best chemistry with these guys. Maybe going forward, you'll have better chemistry with some of them. The Eagles are losing a lot of guys. Not a super amount, but they're losing Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who got several interceptions for them this year, played really well in the slot as like a slot corner safety hybrid that they traded for in the beginning of the year, but didn't extend them. James Bradbury, the guy who got penalized for the holding call in the Super Bowl, who's again played pretty well for them this year. He's at the end of his contract. Maybe he comes back on another 1-year deal, but they got to look into paying Jalen Hurts. Javon Hargraves is probably going to be leaving in free agency. He was a big ticket guy for a couple of years ago. Defensive tackle, gets a lot of pressure for them, and gave them a very good deep D tackle rotation. They had Javon Hargraves, Fletcher Cox, Jordan Davis, and then eventually they signed Ndamukong Suh, who was sitting in free agency halfway through the season. But when they were having issues stopping the run, when Jordan Davis went down, who was a great run stuffing D tackle, they brought in guys like Suh to help boost up the D tackle ranks until they got Jordan Davis back. So that interior D tackle spot's really good for them, but they're losing a really key piece in Javon Hargraves. Hassan Reddick was a great contract that they got, and he was a big piece of them being able to even make it to the playoffs. Great edge rusher for them. Brandon Graham's getting a little bit older. Darius Slay's getting older too. So they have a lot of defensive guys that are getting older, might be getting towards the end of their contract, might take a step back. So the Eagles, I have more worries about. You look at Jason Kelce, the center for them. They're really good at replenishing that interior offensive line, replacing that offensive line with the Eagles. They constantly invest into it. They drafted Andre Dillard. They were able to, coach up a rugby guy and Jordan Mailata to be the left tackle. They have Jason Peters still, Lane Johnson, who plays right tackle for them, plays really well for them. They used to have Jason Peters there for a while. Jason Kelce, who, again, I think is getting towards the end of his contract, but they also drafted a guy in Landon Dickerson. They just keep on building up that offensive line. I think they'll address it this year as well in the draft. So they'll continue to address that offensive line going forward. That's just another spot where I have curiosity as to whether they're going to have maybe a slight step back as they lose some of their depth, as they have like 2 or 3 guys going into free agency. One guy might retire. So I have more concerns about the Eagles making it back than I do about the Chiefs.
Whoa, Joe. So how did you get into, so you're an attorney. How did you get involved in that?
I went to law school, shockingly enough. This isn't sell lawyer, though. This sells like a guy who's in desperate need of a lawyer. But I am a lawyer in New York and New Jersey. I primarily practice real estate at this point. I've done criminal law in the past. I've done some civil practice in the past, but mostly nowadays I do a lot of transactional work. I also do a lot of back-end work for litigation firms to help them with their discovery review and getting them ready for trial. So I do a whole bunch of different things. How did I get into it? The year was 2011. The economy was kind of a little weird. Law school was available to me. I took the LSATs. I did pretty decent on my LSATs. So I was looking around. I submitted my stuff to some places. Rutgers accepted me. A few other schools accepted me. And I was like, okay, Rutgers is in New Jersey. I could drive there. So I started going to Rutgers. I went to Rutgers for 3 years. And I loved law school. I would say if it wasn't for the cost, I would never regret law school because I think it made me try harder than I ever tried before. It put me in a room with some of the smartest people I've ever been with in my life, who I think will go on to do great things. I know a couple people who've gone on to do some really great things, whether it's worked for legal aid, like my friend John Rinaldi, who works for legal aid in Newark, New Jersey. My friend Youssef, who's now a councilman in Jersey City. A friend of mine's a prosecutor in Elizabeth, New Jersey. So I have a lot of friends who've gone on to do some very great things that I'm always impressed by when they do them. And they all go into different areas and walks of life. And it's always interesting hearing where their stories go. But being in that room when you're talking about law, and I think the law school element's such a strange thing because a lot of people are not familiar with what goes on in law school. But it's a very, you get to, it's, you're practicing the Socratic method. You're kind of questioning things all the time, and you're questioning, you're going through case law, and they're teaching you how to read a case, and you're learning legal concepts, maybe some that you were familiar with from your background, but you're also in a room full of people who you have to compete against to get grades, because especially your first year, everything is curved to a B. So, or a B plus. So you're kind of stuck in this like, hey, I have to at least be as good as everybody else here in order for me to stay. And in order for me to really impress people, I have to get, I have to be even better than all these people. And I just thought it was such a nice thing to be in a room full of people who were really actively like trying to like better themselves. Like it never felt like a real competition. Like even though the grading was a competition, it was always an exciting experience going to class every day and talking with people about, law and some of the ideas behind certain concepts and some of the legal concepts and some of the it's weird because you hear a lot of people talk about law school and they say it's so competitive and everybody's out to get each other. And I'm sure there were people who were like that. But when I went to law school, it was such, because Rutgers has this like kind of almost loving kind of element to it. Like almost kind of like they try to pitch it like they're a family. That, back in the 70s, they called it the People's Electric Law School, which they were trying to bring back that moniker. I don't know if that really fit, but it's such a, it's such a unique law school because it's it's a public law school. It's one of the only law schools in New Jersey. So it has a very specific to New Jersey feel to it, but as well to helping public interest. A lot of people there have gone on to work in public interest law, to do things for veteran benefits, to do things for disabilities, to do things for for helping the downtrodden, nonprofits all around, homelessness. They all do so many great things. So many of the people I went to school with, that where they went in life. And it's such a nice thing to be able to say, I met these people. I've been in a room full of these people who are doing good things, who've gone on to do, some really great things. And it's kind of impressive when dude, that guy's off working as a mayor, or this one's doing this thing. They're trying to make change in their world. And again, that was what I always loved about it. How I became a lawyer is kind of like, it's kind of like you're wandering through life and like, okay, this is a thought. I took the LSATs. I kind of like, I looked at a book for the LSATs for 3 days, took the LSATs, got a decent enough score, applied to law school. That's not the exciting thing. The exciting thing is the people I was around, the day to day of it. During law school, I went into law school 300 pounds. I came out 180 pounds and working out all the time. Like it was such a different experience. The people who you were around made you want to try harder in a lot of different ways in life. I wanted to get more physically fit. I'm the only guy who went to law school, came out more athletic. But it also helped I was in my early 20s. So I went to law school and I got to be around a lot of people who are working their butts off, literally and metaphorically, as they're, studying for these curved exams and, trying to really, try to hammer home to try to get jobs coming out of law school. Because you come out of law school and it's a very weird market to be a lawyer in right now. It's not like what is 20 years ago, where being a lawyer was kind of like 20, 25 years ago, where becoming a lawyer was very prestige position. Nowadays it's, the higher up lawyers keep on trying to cut more and more from the lower end lawyers. So it becomes it's a different market set. It's a different feel to it than what it might have been 20 years ago. But the thing I always appreciate with it is the things that the people I've met and the things that they are doing in their lives that help change. I have my friend John Rinaldi, who I name drop him because I went to, not only did I go to law school with him, I went to college with him. We did a podcast called Punk Law 101 together. We love talking law and all that stuff. So he's a very sweet guy who love talking to. He's one of my favorite people that I've known in my life. Because we just happen to have all these kind of curves in our lives that go together at a certain point. So big shout out to him. But again, he works for legal aid. He works on disability cases. Very sweet dude. And again, one of my closest friends. So you just kind of, you go through life and you're like, wow, I went not just to college with this guy at Ramapo, but then to Rutgers Law and go to, become a lawyer with him. It's such a strange journey because, again, like I said before, the things I really appreciate were working in the clinics, being able to help somebody on a guardianship case, or being able to work and fix a nonprofit and put that together, or, and kind of do those kind of things that were all kind of like, didn't know I'd even touch when I went into law school. My first day of law school, I almost thought about not doing it because I didn't know where I was going with it. I got offered a job editing porn for a living my first day of law school. I almost took that job, and I probably would have been given more money in that job than I would have going on to become a lawyer. But because of the things that I learned and what it pushed me to do with my mind, with my body, with where I was going in life at that time, I truly I truly enjoy those few years there.
Yeah, that's amazing, well, Joe. We appreciate you. So, tell us. So, you're an attorney, but then how did you go from doing that to stand-up comedy? Like, have you always been a comedian? Like, or is it something that you just recently got into?
So I've been doing stand-up for about 5 years now. I got into stand-up a few years after I went to law school, but I had always wanted to do stand-up. I just didn't know how you did it. It's kind of how I ended up becoming a filmmaker, because I did all the short films and stuff like that when I was younger, and I was doing all that stuff. But the reason why I was doing short films is I had a camera. I knew how to make a short. I knew how to and I would take classes and I would watch stuff online, or I'd read blogs. I'd find ways of making, how do you make this better? How do you make your short film better? And bettering myself there initially. So that's what I did even before law school, as I was trying to be a filmmaker, because there was two things I wanted to be. I wanted to be a storyteller, right? I initially wanted to do comics, but I couldn't draw for the life of me. So I was like, okay, I'm not doing comics, because I'd have to ask somebody to draw it for me. And I feel like that's kind of asking a lot. So then my next step was like, okay, I could write books, but nobody reads anymore. And I'm like, well, there's two other options. I wanted to do stand-up because I was a huge fan of Robin Williams and George Carlin, and eventually Bill Burr, and a whole bunch of, and Eddie Izzard, all who've done so many theatrically kind of fun things, but also just like very enjoyable comics to watch. And that was a huge inspiration for me as a child. And I knew since I was 10 years old, I wanted to do stand-up. And then as I got older, I just didn't know how you did it, but I knew how to do the film thing. So I went out and did the film thing and shot some videos and did some stuff, then went to law school, and kind of like after about 2.5 years in law school, where I was actually at my start of law school, I was actually getting offers to go out and shoot other people's music videos, because like I had started getting so good at being a director of photography, of lighting things and shooting stuff with the camera and setting shots up. I got to a point where I was good enough, and then I kind of stopped because I was in law school, and because I was hitting like a weird point in my life where sometimes you hit like you have those moments, those dark moments. And I hit one of those moments. I stopped doing the things I love, kind of lost myself for a bit. And then when I came back to trying to find myself, I found myself doing stand-up comedy. I think I've had two really dark moments in life where I just went like, I had more than two, but the darkest of the dark moments immediately were followed by things that I ended up loving and that I'm very much connected to. One of those things is stand-up comedy. And that was the year before I started doing stand-up, I think I might have been kind of the most confused of where I should be going in life. I was already a lawyer, I didn't quite have a direction. And then I started doing stand-up, and I loved it so much. It becomes a thing of, people ask me, do you like doing stand-up still after 4 years, after, even after 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? Yes, and I love it more now than I did back then, because I can go up and do it and have fun with it. I can go up in front of a room, and if there's people there who are there to watch, I can do something with it. And I could have nothing prepared and find a way to come to an entertaining moment there. And it's something that it becomes a skill that you have to kind of prep yourself for. And it's all like, in the pre-production of it, the prep of it, like, hey, I'm working out. Like, when you're, think about an athlete, athletes have to work out, they have to prep, they have to train. If you're playing football, you have to learn the plays. With stand-up, it's the same thing. The writing, trying to memorize stuff, your sleep schedule, your health habits, all that stuff plays into, am I going to be cognitively healthy enough that when I get up on stage that I can crush it here?
Whoa, Joe. We're running out of time. We got 2 minutes and 22 seconds left for the podcast. Leave us out with some good stand-up comedy for 2 minutes.
Stand-up comedy?
Anything? Yeah, your best 2 minute, if you had to get on for 2 minutes. We got 2 minutes.
So that's the thing. Like, with stand-up, it's a very unique thing, though, because it's like, it becomes a thing where you have that audience. Like, I have you here. It's great having you here. But it's a very different feel than what you do with a podcast. The podcast it's an interaction between you and me. Stand-up is an interaction between me and the audience.
Right.
So I don't know if it's different.
Something different. Yeah.
But what I'll say is this: I appreciate you having me on. I have to find a way to get you on one of the shows that I do. Either Face Off with Facemeyer, I can give you the call-in info for that. We do a lot of different interviews, a lot of different people, whether they're in the sports or not. Bandit does a lot of different shows. Also, again, like I do Let's Talk Sports on Fridays. That network's starting to grow a little bit. And anybody who wants to find me, I'm BROJO. Death is in the end of left. Punch like a delicious drink you drink in the summer. And I appreciate you having me on, though, dude.
Anytime. Well, Joe, I'd like to have you back on again, and I'll definitely come and join your podcast sometime soon. So
Awesome. I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me on.
Wojo, thank you, Wojo, and we salute you. So and appreciate you coming on, brother.
Thank you.
God bless. Okay. Thank you, Wojo.
TTFN, ta-ta for now. We have 15 seconds of airtime.